Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing a new documentary called Forced Out that looks at how Jewish members of the Labour Party were harassed and bullied and what is only been described as anti-Semitic abuse within the Labour Party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's guests all the way from North London. They are Judith Ornstein and Jed Ornstein, a married couple. So it's not very often I get a married couple on the Middle East Report, and it's great to have you guys back on the programme. We did a programme, I can't believe it was that long ago, back in the summer of 2017, where we showed your very powerful documentary called Whitewash that was looking into the issue of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. But here you are, you've got a new documentary called Forced Out. So first of all, start off with you, Judith. What impact had Whitewash, the film that you made, had on really uncovering the evil that is anti-Semitism that occurred under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn within the Parliamentary Labour Party?
So Whitewashed was the first documentary. It was actually specifically aimed at what happened with the Chakrabarti report when Shami Chakrabarti was commissioned to do a report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And very shortly after finishing that report, she was elevated to the House of Lords. She was made Baroness Chakrabarti, and she was made into she was given the role of Shadow Attorney General. She's a lawyer, a human rights lawyer. We thought very highly of her until she did the report, which quite frankly turned into a whitewash. One of the ways that it was a whitewash that we both uncovered was that she had a list of acknowledgements at the back of the report, the people that she had used. I uncovered on social media many people, including academics, writers, people who were just interested in anti-Semitism generally, who had great faith in Chakrabarti, submitted to her with their hearts about documenting the anti-Semitism with the party, and quite frankly, were overlooked. They're not acknowledged in the report. And when we made the film and when I spoke to them all, they said, quite frankly, they believe that what they wrote was ignored. And I published their missing submissions in a volume. None of this was covered in her report. She made scant recommendations in the report. It was 28 pages, the body of it, it was anecdotal, it was full of I's, me's, myselfs, and she made scant recommendations. She seemed to scurry into the House of Lords and seemed to do nothing about the scant recommendations that she had, that she wanted them to do. Nothing happened. It was things like calling Jewish people Zios, comparing Jewish people to Nazis. Nothing changed. She recommended an open process of discipline. She recommended training. It was very wishy-washy. I think the very opening phrase was, the Labour Party is not overrun by anti-Semitism. What it did then was it created a starting point for all of us to come together. The press, when we launched it, was there. It created an academic underpinning. By the way, I wouldn't have been able to find the missing submissions because there was no transparency in her report. We don't know what happened. She also took verbal submissions of people who had experienced it firsthand, when I produced that report, when I produced my project, I was looking for evidence of the verbal submissions. Nobody was willing to raise their head above the parapet because there were people like students who were now in the world of work and felt too intimidated to come to me to tell me what had happened to them. And then I thought, well, it's not real evidence anyway because they can't remember what they said, and I want to make sure everything is has a firm underpinning.
Absolutely.
However, about a year ago, I was contacted by a lay preacher called Mike Fryer, who had travelled from Wales to Manchester.
He's a great guy. I know Mike very
well. Right.
Really good guy.
So he had travelled and he had given a submission, a verbal submission, and was absolutely dogged. He was finding somebody. He was trying to find somebody that would put his story out there. He has, in writing, and I have his emails from Shami Chakrabarty's political assistant, he wanted to know what had happened to his verbal submission because he wanted a record of it. He wanted to remember what he had said. And he received an email after great persistence saying that no record, no verbatim record was kept of any of the verbal submissions. They were noted down for just for the purposes of keeping verbatim notes by the person listening to them. There is no record of any of those verbal submissions. We actually got that story into the Times, which was down to Mike Fryer, me. You know, we got there through a chain, and I did hear afterwards through channels from somebody political, the journalist at the Times, that when that story came out, that Labour head office was in absolute chaos because of the story. However, I think because of legal reasons, there's always this thing when the newspapers expose Labour anti-Semitism, there's always this thing where a Labour spokesman said, we do not tolerate anti-Semitism, we're doing everything we can to root it out. And they said, this isn't quite the truth. They actually discredited Mike's words, and the Times published it, presumably for legal reasons. But we had an email trail. We had evidence that this is what happened.
And Jed, I just want to really bring you in here. I suppose the big question we have to ask is that you have dedicated so much time, so much energy, so much effort into producing what is now 2 documentaries looking at the issue of Jew hatred in the Labour Party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. What was it that triggered this reaction to get the truth out there, to expose Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership for the hurt, the pain, the harassment, the bullying, and what can only be described as anti-Semitic instances under his leadership when he was in charge of the British Labour Party?
Yeah, I just would really want to go back to the submissions themselves in the first instance, because when you read the submissions, people who made them, as I say, academics and others who had felt that there was something wrong with the Labour Party that they felt was their party, they thought that the submissions that they made would make a difference. Yes, they were done with hope and goodwill. That they were the ones in the book. When we saw the film, the overriding feeling was we had been conned. They'd made fools of us. They weren't really interested at all in what we were writing. It was just a way of putting everything under the carpet. And as we were, neither of us were particularly political, but both of us, for many reasons, always think that we would always fight injustice wherever it came. I mean, Judith thought the buses being stopped in our locality unjust. Judith thought some bad practices within the local hospital and things like this. We always felt that where we have to be is to stand up for what we feel is wrong. And here we've come into a situation, as you know, previously all the previous Labour prime ministers and parties were a good, proper opposition, and the democracy needs opposition. And suddenly we were seeing things that didn't feel right within our democracy. And this report, which was a whitewash or a sham from Shami Chakrabarty, we felt there is something here that smells bad, yeah? And let's see what we can do. We had no idea, when Judith started, we had no idea that a book would come out of it, let alone a film. And as the submissions that Judith unearthed came in, and within a couple of days, we had a lot of those submissions when Judith put it out on Facebook and social media, and we started reading them, we were shocked. And we said to each other, well, Judith said to me, I'm going to make a project of this. Are you going to support me? So I thought, well, I better say yes and support her, because I thought she was absolutely right in doing so. And so that's where it actually started. And then, even though the report came out in June 16, we were still optimistic that perhaps this would be the end of it and people would actually take note. After all, we're talking about a party that prides itself on being anti-racist, a party that has built itself up on what it considers to be a fair society. And here, we were looking at something that was racially corrupt and in particular anti-Semitic, and we could not tolerate that, and we felt that we had to do something about it and stand up.
Absolutely. Judith, I remember at the time when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, I think it was back in September of 2015, after Ed Miliband had lost that general election to David Cameron. And very, very surprised to see that the leadership of the Labour Party changed their voting rules to allow a kind of wider audience or participation within the parliamentary Labour Party to have outsiders essentially from the mainstream party, like Jeremy Corbyn, being able to stand as leader, knowing that, he said in 2009 that Hezbollah and Hamas are his friends and would often be seen supporting extreme genocidal terrorist organisations, his support for the IRA. Surely that was a kind of warning to the Labour movement of the dangers if Jeremy Corbyn were to take the leadership. And seriously, no one seemed to have actually taken this threat seriously. In hindsight, what should have been done?
What should have been done? I'll never understand how this happened. I'll never understand. What should have been done, I can't tell you, because we can't go back to those days. But going back to sitting with terrorists, we had lunch with somebody yesterday who said he became politically active because his young cousin was killed in a bomb attack in Haifa by somebody that Jeremy Corbyn had sat next to and called his friend. He had been released in the Gilad Shalit exchange, and he's a leader, and he's a leading terrorist now. And he said, this is who Jeremy Corbyn calls his friends. How the Labour Party allowed that man to become their leader will haunt me to my dying days, because he's anti-democratic. The people that were brought in, it was Ed Miliband who allowed those people in. The people who surged into the party were what we call entryists. They were people from other parties. They were hard left, they were crank left. They were people who had no interest in democratic processes. I can't tell you what the Labour Party should have done. It's too late.
So let's see an extract of this excellent and outstanding documentary called Forced Out, that looks at bullying, intimidation and anti-Semitism within the Labour Party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn.
It will be my pleasure and my honour to host an event in Parliament where our friends from Hezbollah will be speaking.
I think there is a bias towards saying that Israel is a democracy in the Middle East. Israel has a right to exist. Israel has its security concerns.
This anti-Zionist anti-Semitism was the new anti-Semitism, and it wasn't very long before you got back to all the same old tropes and hatreds and prejudice and lies. They were spreading a culture of hate towards Jews. I can't be part of that.
this prominent Labour Party member, by calling for a march on the local synagogue in Brighton and Hove, shows an absolute illustration of the kind of worldview that they have, in that the whole of the Jewish community is linked to Israel, that it's some whole conspiracy against them, and that the suspension of one of the candidates for saying something anti-Semitic was somehow engineered by the Jewish community.
Every time the Labour Party, senior ranking people in the Labour Party, called the Jewish community Trump fanatics, for example, and Trump supporters, I would have a sense of doom.
I was asking the UN to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and after I did my speech, I left the hall and a British civil servant came up to me, almost quite aggressively, and said to me how ashamed he was of me, that I'd lied, that I was making up accusations of anti-Semitism, that the British ambassador would be ashamed of me, that I don't represent Britain.
I left the Labour Party because I was appalled at the anti-Semitism that has developed, the extremism and anti-Semitism that I think has poisoned the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. I didn't leave to walk away from the fight or to run away. I left to shine a spotlight on what's happening and to demand that other people step up and sort of fight against this.
Dear Miss Formby, it is with sincere regret that I write to you today to resign my membership of the Labour Party.
I joined the Labour Party in 1993.
Dear Peter,
having been persuaded
it is with regret and some relief that I am today resigning from the Labour Party.
Resign from the Labour Party. I have been a member for 55 years.
I'm David Hirsch. I'm a lecturer at Goldsmiths, University of London. I resigned from the Labour Party when remaining a member became unbearable. This film is about people who've had to leave the Labour Party because of anti-Semitism. They resigned, but really it was constructive dismissal. They were forced out by the politics and culture of anti-Semitism, which became normal in the party. Warren Morgan wasn't just a member of the Labour Party in Brighton, he was the leader of the Labour Council.
It was always a pleasure for Labour Conference to come to Brighton and Hove in the 25 years that I was a member. But in the past 4 years, it's become a nightmare with the kind of racism and anti-Semitism that we've seen.
At the 2017 Labour Conference, a leaflet was circulated demanding the expulsion of the Jewish Labour movement. Another quoted Nazi propaganda to make a point against Labour Jews, and Holocaust denial was defended as part of legitimate debate. Jewish MP Luciana Berger was so harassed that the following year she needed police protection. Warren wrote to Labour's General Secretary saying that if nothing was done about anti-Semitism, then Labour couldn't meet in the council-run conference centre again.
My view had always been that the Labour Party was an anti-racist party, and that applied to anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial as well. Not only was it morally wrong in my view, but it was wrong in all of the policies that we stood for as a council, as a Labour council. So I knew that I had to do something. Very quickly, the reaction from party officers, from other people in the party across Brighton and Hove, was that I was fabricating this, that there was no evidence of it, and that I was weaponising it to attack the left of the party. There were motions circulated around all of the branches in the city which basically called on me to withdraw the whole thing that I'd put through, apologise for it, or stand down as leader. And the whole thing was to get me to admit that I'd made it all up.
Hostility to Warren spread fast in the local party. A cartoon depicting him as a dancing rabbi was circulated by Labour members, and police advised him to install security at his own home. He was uninvited to meetings discussing disciplinary action against him, and when he attended anyway, people claimed that his presence was intimidating.
It was just a good 30 minutes of, you've made all this up. This is just an attack. This is factionalism. This is something that isn't motivated by any kind of anti-racist thing. This is purely factional attacks on Jeremy. Dear Miss Formby, as for so many long-serving members and councillors, it's been made clear to me on many occasions by people who largely joined in 2015, often from other left-wing parties, that I'm no longer welcome. Indeed, it's been argued that I was never real Labour at all. It was made clear that I should stand down as council leader and would not win re-selection.
As you can see there, it's an extremely important and excellent documentary, extremely sad, looking at the treatment of Jewish members and those that support Israel within the Labour movement. Jed, there's been lots of BBC documentaries on the issue of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, but I think what makes your documentary so special and so unique is the fact that you give it from a kind of Jewish perspective of those within the Labour Party that are Jewish or supporters of Israel that have suffered unbelievable abuse under Corbyn's leadership. Why did you decide that it was time to have another documentary and a book called Forced Out?
Yeah, well, in the film, there were seven people took part in the film, of which 3 were not Jewish, as it happens, but they have been immensely supportive of the Jewish community. Joan Ryan, Warren Morgan, who you saw, and of course Ian Austin as well. It was important because this was a tale where people who had committed their political lives to being members of the Labour Party, they'd never thought that they were anything other than core Labour members, had been found to be unwanted within that party. And in fact, the abuse that they suffered, the misogynistic abuse in the case of the women members, including Luciana Berger, for example, but of course we've seen Lewis Ellman, we saw Hannah Rose there, we saw also Joan Ryan, has been unbelievable, and here they were, their whole political home being taken away from under them, and we felt that it was important that they should share this in one body. So there were more than 30 resignation letters that we actually showed, from ordinary councillors to members of the House of Lords and everything in between, members of the European Parliament and so on. And that widespread showed such a spread of people who had been made homeless that we felt that it was something that had to be reported, and so that when people look back in the future, they would understand what had gone on. And maybe in the future, if at that time we didn't know whether it would be defeated or Corbyn's project would be defeated, we first launched the film in the week before the general election, the 2019 general election. We didn't know whether, in fact, the British electorate would understand this terrible anti-Semitism within the party. In fact, we should have given much more credit to the British electorate, because this was undoubtedly one of the things that swung it away from Corbyn, and hopefully has brought an end to the project that was there.
Well, thank you to you both, because you played a major part in that. Judith, how important is this documentary to the likes of Ian Austin, to the likes of Luciana Berger and Joan Ryan, to know that they have the support of members of the Jewish community, to know that there has been a book written detailing the abuse and the bullying they've received, knowing there has been a documentary made to expose Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership and his hatred of the Jewish people?
You've actually struck to the core of the way that I campaign, because a lot of people go online, they confront the haters, they argue with them. That would make me ill. But my way of doing it is to support people. I started off by supporting John Mann. I have a Facebook group in support of John Mann. We've actually become friends because of that. I didn't know him from Adam. So my way of supporting is to look for the positive and to make sure that we say thank you, how much we appreciate these people. And yes, and there is so much good in people. And also what I'd like to continue with Jed about where the idea came from. It's also what is the art of the possible. We are retired. We dug into our retirement fund to fund these projects. With the whitewashed, we had the submissions. Here, I suddenly became aware that there were these letters, these very moving, individually they were moving, scattered around. They'd been published in newspapers, here, there, and everywhere. And I thought these need to be collected, as Jed said, for a document, for history, to make sure the story is told. And these brave people, it wasn't just those people. There was a councillor in Somerset who was abused, who was told that she needed help. There have been people gaslighted. There's there's just these amazing people. A mayor who's I can't even remember the places. These wonderful people that not only did I want to support them, but they helped me to get me through this situation, to reach out to the good people.
Incredible. And Jed, what is your response now that thankfully Jeremy Corbyn lost the last election back in December of 2019, and to think that someone with his background of supporting Islamist genocidal terrorist organisations and supporting the IRA, supporting a position of the extreme left, not being even able to mention the word Israel, which is the Jewish name of the Jewish state, and then also the abuse that Labour members received within the party through his authoritarian regime called Momentum. And now that's all been exposed. But the fact that he was able to stand and contest the last general election and could have won that election back in 2019 and would have had the keys to 10 Downing Street. Was the nation not really aware of the seriousness of the threat that he posed, not only to the Jewish community, to Israel, but also our own national security?
Well, in the end, I think actually the electorate were aware. They were aware not necessarily because of anti-Semitism, but for example, the guy was not seen as being patriotic, and I think most people actually believe in the achievements of the United Kingdom. They believe our role, whatever it is in the world, to be someone that actually is a force for good. And they were looking at a guy who supported all of those things, all of those enemies of these very ideas. He was against the army. He was against our historical past. He was against, really, what went on in Parliament. He was always a rebel against Parliament. He was a danger to our own democracy in every way, as well as being somebody who was everything but what he said he was, in that he said he would bring, a new kind of politics. And all one saw, and what the electorate saw, was this regime that would set out to utterly destroy any enemy, not brook any voice that differed from their own, and was not somebody who the electorate wanted to represent the United Kingdom. And I think the longer he was leader of the opposition, the longer people had to really realise what sort of man they were dealing with. And I think this was all reflected. The Labour Party blame only one thing, and that is Brexit. But he couldn't make a decision on Brexit in any case, and of course that was damaging. But they saw through him in the end, and the majority of people did take that to the ballot box with them.
Yeah, thankfully it did. So let's have a look at another extract of Forced Out.
I've been opposing anti-Semitism since I was a student in the 1980s. People said Zionism was racism and Jewish societies were Zionist, and therefore, they said, our Jewish societies should be prohibited from campus. In 2003, this same hostility returned when I was in the academics trade union. There was a campaign for a boycott of Israel, which meant that Israelis should be prohibited from our campuses here in Britain, and anyone who spoke out like I did was cast as being racist. There would never be a campaign to exclude the academics of any other country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good, well-funded public services are the lifeblood of a decent society.
Louise Ellman said that she never wanted to be a Jewish MP, she wanted to be a Labour MP. I never wanted to be a Jewish sociologist, I wanted to be a sociologist. But opposing anti-Semitism has you constructed from outside and in a hostile way as somebody who's working for a foreign power.
I became leader of Lancashire County Council in 1981, a very difficult time, mass unemployment, a government that just didn't care about the North, and I was one of many other people who worked with businesses, with other people to see what we could actually do to bring jobs and to restore some prosperity to the areas we represented. It wasn't done by slogans, it was done by action.
But in 2019 she was forced out of the Labour Party as a Zionist by people who said she was a racist and not a proper socialist and not fit to be in the party.
It's absolutely appalling to be treated as a racist, and it's something I could never have contemplated would happen in the Labour Party. One of the reasons I joined the Labour Party was its anti-racist stance. That's what the Labour Party is all about. And I've spent most of my adult life fighting racism of all sorts.
The worldview that now rules in Labour has a special place for Israel. It makes it central to and symbolic of everything that is bad in the world. This is anti-Semitism.
You go to local meetings, and in my case you have obsessive questioning all about Israel and Palestine, and the people at those meetings only want to know about that. They're not interested in what you're doing about the health service, about jobs, about housing. They're absolutely obsessed with their real hatred of Israel. I have been a member for 55 years and the public representative in local and central government continuously since 1970. My decision has been truly agonising, as it has been for thousands of other party members who have already left. I will not join any other party. I hope that under different leadership I will be able to return to my political home.
In 2016, Shami Chakrabarty's investigation of Labour anti-Semitism was condemned as a whitewash by the Board of Deputies of British Jews.
Do you have political ambitions in the Labour Party?
Do I have political ambitions in the Labour Party?
Do you want to run as an MP?
I don't know. Probably not, but I don't know.
Okay. If you were offered a place in the House of Lords, would you take it?
Goodness me, what?
That's a general question.
I don't know.
Have you been offered a place?
I don't know whether I want to talk about my future ambitions at this point.
Parry Mitchell, a member of the House of Lords, resigned on the day of its publication.
They will brook no dissent whatsoever. So any member of Parliament, any shadow minister, whoever it happens to be, who voices a different opinion, becomes the enemy. And they use a multitude of weapons against them, including social media, including making sure that the membership of their local committees do everything they can to deselect them. It's the environment and the rules and the whole everything associated with it. I am saying to myself, I don't want to be part of this party anymore. I'm out. I have been pushed out of my home. How can I, a Jew and a Zionist, remain in a party where the leadership is so hostile to Israel, even to its very existence, and which also flirts with anti-Semitism? In the end, it was an easy decision, but that makes it nonetheless painful.
I cannot remain a member of the Labour Party while its leadership allows Jews to be abused with impunity, and the victims of such abuse to be ridiculed, have their motives questioned, and their integrity called into doubt.
Joan Ryan took anti-Semitism seriously. She educated herself to understand it, and she campaigned against it.
I'm not Jewish. Anti-Semitism isn't just a problem for Jews, it's racism. I was born in Warrington in the northwest into a very working class Irish community, but a lot of people who came from Ireland of my mum and dad's generation, they'd come from hard times from poverty, and they had hard times when they got here, and they faced a lot of discrimination. And I think the underlying principle on which the Labour Party rests, on which it developed, is equality. And I think it was a party of openness and optimism and hope. And they have destroyed that.
Here is one example out of hundreds of hate mail received by Joan Ryan. This letter was slipped under her office door in Parliament by somebody who had full security clearance. In the spring of 2018, there was an unprecedented demonstration by British Jews against Labour anti-Semitism. That summer, Labour was stubbornly reluctant to adopt the definition of anti-Semitism promoted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, known as IHRA. This definition warns that some of the things Corbyn and his allies wanted to legitimise may be anti-Semitic.
At the 2018 conference, there was a Brexit debate, and the party spin doctors were very careful to make sure there were no European Union flags visible on conference floor. The same day, there was what is euphemistically called a Middle East debate, and suddenly, from nowhere, literally hundreds of Palestinian flags appeared.
I think at that moment, when all the flags appeared and in the midst of that difficult debate, I think the Palestinian flag was being used by Labour Party delegates as a weapon against Jewish people, against Israel. How can that possibly help to build peace? It can't. There's nothing in that action that signalled conflict resolution values.
In the context of relentless anti-Semitism and its routine denial, this became a classic political dog whistle. If you're attuned to the frequency, you know that it's Jew baiting. But if you're not, it can look completely innocent.
And our hearts have to go out to those brave and courageous former members of the Labour Party who said enough is enough and walked away from the party that they loved and the party that they held most dear to. Absolutely shocking. Both of you, I want to thank you so much for producing this documentary, because it is powerful. It is important that we hold our political leaders to account, especially when it comes to the issue of Jew hatred, because we know that what starts with the Jewish people never ever finishes with the Jewish people, and it will infect and engulf our entire civilization, our society and our nation, and only darkness can follow. And you brought the light with this documentary, and that's what's so powerful. Can you share something about the homelessness, really, of these ex-Labour MPs? And I have a good friend with Michael McCann, the director of Israel-Britain Alliance, who's a regular on this programme, and how he left the Labour Party, and many others have left the Labour Party because of the hatred of the actions towards the Jewish people within the party. Do you think there's any way that they can come back under the leadership of Sir Keir Starmer in the party?
Right. Well, it's interesting. The three Labour lords who resigned, the Jewish ones, have all actually re-entered the party under Keir Starmer. Joan Ryan says that she's going to give it a year. She wants to see the words put into action. And I think there's all shades in between. I think a lot of people, I don't know about Louise Ellman, I want to really like Keir Starmer. I felt in his speech, there was something he said when he introduced the report into anti-Semitism. He said it's up to them to come back. He didn't actually say, I will invite them back. He says it's a very important test when they come back, but it's up to them. He didn't exactly, not in public anyway, reach out to them. And they're all people that care about poor people, etc., etc. But I'm actually, in a way, as worried about the people who've been put off from joining the Labour Party. It's what Hannah Rose says in the documentary. These young people who have a social conscience, what are they going to do? Where are they going to put themselves now? That work everybody's leaving. But I also want to say there were people who didn't leave the Labour Party. There were people who didn't leave the Labour Party and didn't fight. But there were fabulous people who stayed in the Labour Party and really did fight and put themselves online. So I want to acknowledge them here.
Absolutely.
Because I can't choose between them. They're both, the people who left and the people who stayed and fought. There's nothing, they're both wonderful.
And isn't Keir Starmer in a very difficult situation? Because on the one hand, he stayed in the party, he didn't resign from the Labour Party, he didn't really kind of speak out about the anti-Semitism in the party under Corbyn's leadership. Now he finds that he was in a position to contend for the leadership last summer, got the leadership, and now said that he's developing a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. And yet we see with his own shadow foreign affairs spokesman that she actually, back in the summer when the Israeli government was saying they were looking to extend Israeli sovereignty into Judea and Samaria, she said that sanctions should be placed upon Israel. So effectively she's endorsing the BDS. And this is where it gets complicated, isn't it? Because it's not only the targeting of the Jewish people, but it's also the targeting of the Jewish state of Israel and discriminating against the Jewish state.
I think we should state that anti-Semitism in the UK has really or should not have anything to do with what is happening in Israel, which is a completely different state, although there should be understanding of the difficulties in the Middle East and so on. But I think Keir Starmer's got a very difficult job, because today, this very day, on Prime Minister's Questions Time, Johnson reminded him that he had spent 4 years in the Corbyn government, and therefore he has still a lot to answer for. And so he's going to find it very. He's starting from a minus position. Also, if you read words from Corbyn, he said there should be zero tolerance of anti-Semitism in the party. So when Starmer says there should be zero tolerance, that's good. Of course, it's good, but actually, it is now actions that matter, not words.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can I just come in there? That when I'm in doubt about Keir Starmer, I have friends who document what's going on in what I call the Corbynist rump on social media. And they detest Keir Starmer. They call him a Zionist stooge. They call him in the pay of the Jews. And every time I read that, I think, okay, maybe it's going to be all right.
Absolutely. And I suppose one thing I think we need to add on to this is how much have you contributed to the Equalities and Human Rights Commission's investigation looking into harassment and anti-Semitism within the Labour Party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn? And how important has this film and the resignation letters been in giving evidence to this body that was set up by a Labour government back in the days of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown?
Right. I'm not an official. I didn't make there were 3, I think, official submissions, or was it just 2? The Council Against, I think, yes, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the Jewish Labour Movement, I think, were the official. There might have been one other, but I did write a submission with the aid of, I wrote it myself. I became intricately embedded in the law that was behind the EHRC. And I wrote a submission on behalf of Whitewashed. We hadn't completed Forced Out yet, but I pointed out the failings of the Chakrabarti inquiry and how, in fact, that led to what followed, that she had an opportunity and she blew it, actually, all the years that followed. And when I read it and small things in it, and I think, yeah, that might have been what I submitted, but I do know that other people have had an influence, that because I've put down a body of evidence, we both have put down this body of evidence, that we know that other people have used it as a stepping stone. And I'm very happy for it to be that in that background, being the evidence for other people. So, yeah, I mean, I just hope that it will work now. It's got a statutory force. I don't know if people actually understand what the EHRC was, not so much what it said, I don't know if you would like me to deal with that, it comes under employment law. It was very clever of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, who are in fact lawyers, to go into it that way. It's to do with equalities and human rights law. When you try to prosecute for hate crime with the police are underfunded, the Crown prosecution is underfunded. There are very great serious crimes because of that go unpunished, and anti-Semitism doesn't come under that. So the problem is that people had to be, as it were, employees or agents of the Labour Party. So they have been outed under that, under those rules, under those very strict rules. But it meant that people who were Labour members, ordinary Labour members, who were responsible for massive amounts of anti-Semitic abuse, don't come under the aegis of the law because they are not technically agents of the Labour Party. So they've escaped. But the EHRC has charged Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party to pursue those people, even though it wasn't under the auspices of the law that they have to report on.
And we know that as of the report by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, JED, that was announced on Thursday, the 29th of October, that the Labour Party here, just get this correct, unlawfully discriminated against Jewish members under Jeremy Corbyn. Then we saw Jeremy Corbyn's response, in which he was saying that the issue of anti-Semitism was heightened and used as a political weapon against his leadership and against himself, resulted in him being suspended from the party. Do you think any further legal action can be taken against the likes of Jeremy Corbyn and those who push this anti-Semitic agenda within the Labour Party?
Well, remember when Keir Starmer said that he accepts all the terms, he also said, one of the matters that also are contained in the report, that attempts to diminish the numbers and to water down what was happening in itself was an offence under the legislation. And there, within a few minutes, publicly on television, Corbyn made this statement. So you have to ask why he made it, what advice he was given, and whether, in fact, it was an immediate and deliberate provocation. And I think you probably would come to a conclusion that it was. And now is sort of dare. But what was interesting that followed this is that people like McDonnell or McCluskey rode back from telling people to leave the party, because they realised that if you leave the party, you leave the constituency Labour Party at local level, suddenly your power base is completely gone. So they've rode back from that. And I think if you want to look back further and cynically against what there was, I think the Labour Party had no real prospect, or rather they thought they had no prospect of winning the election in 2017 and again in 2019. But their principal purpose was to ensure that every constituency Labour Party was governed by the left wing, and therefore with a government now in a position that would, without even COVID, Brexit would have brought real difficulties. The likelihood that is at the next election, they would have fought an election with a predominantly left-wing, ultra-socialist party that would have then given them the platform to form a government in that manner. And so I suppose what further action has to be taken? I think gradually, as we understand it, the extremists are being rooted out of the constituency Labour parties, in fact. And of course, there's the NEC elections that we will get the result of in the next, I think, couple of weeks, which will be a very important indication of what power Starmer has behind him to deal with the extreme left with momentum, much the same way that Kinnock had dealt with the situation in the past.
And Judith, we see that Len McCluskey, the leader of the Unite Union, has said that by suspending Jeremy Corbyn, this will spark a civil war within the Labour Party, and that it could cost Keir Starmer £30 million to fight the next general election. Does he have, this is Keir Starmer, does he have the support behind him to take on these extremists and these anti-Semites within the Labour Party and put the party on a different trajectory?
Do you know, you're asking me, I don't have a crystal ball, I'm sorry. But...
no, but this is what you'd like to see, though, because this is essential.
I would like to see it. Yeah.
Because no one's going to trust Keir Starmer if he doesn't deliver on this.
Right.
And he's made this a point of his leadership, and he's put his whole leadership on the line to actually fight this issue. So,
OK, let's go to what happened in the election, because you asked, Jed, before about legal sanctions. I think what we've seen is the power of democracy, which is what the EHRC report is a once in a lifetime. It's never happened before. It only happened before to the National Front, and it was nothing like the level of this. The fact that we needed legal forces to take them on was just appalling. But now, please God, we'll get democracy rolling. We got, in a way, more important was the election. We saw the red wall falling. We saw Keir Starmer's support. Let's hope that COVID, etc., doesn't destroy that, because there are so many other catastrophes going on right now. But he has the support of the good people of the United Kingdom, who actually are not anti-Semitic. They don't like people who don't like Jews. It doesn't fit. So I hope now that democracy will do its work.
absolutely. So, Jed, where can our viewers watch this amazing documentary that you guys have produced? And also, how can we get behind you? Because both of you are an incredible inspiration to show what can be done to actually fight evil and to fight injustice.
Well, the documentary can be found on YouTube under Forced Out Labour Anti-Semitism, actually. So it's quite
whitewashed.
As can whitewashed as well. So they're both there. Both books are available on Amazon, so they're easy to obtain. We have been inspired by the support that we have. People have come to us and helped us with the finances this time. And indeed, last time, they've actually made it quite clear that we must carry on with the work. We had an inspiring director.
Andrea Frankenthal.
Yep. She was incredible. David Hirsch, who's been a star in everything that we've done.
Ollie for the first.
And also in the first film, Ollie Annisfield. I mean, these are people who are really committed to helping us and to bring it forward, and also the encouragement from people like Ian Austin or John Mann to get on and do these things was something that we found very special, because both of us had not entered this field before 4 years ago, actually.
Well, if you guys had entered it maybe a couple of decades earlier, imagine what kind of country we've been living in now, which is a real testimony to you both and to what you've actually done. So I'm just going to end on this, Judith. How can our viewers get behind you? Because our viewers are passionate supporters of Israel. They are passionate supporters of Israel. And we have to acknowledge the incredible contribution made by the Jewish community to British life. And in the absence of that, I dread to think what the state our nation would be in terms of the arts, in terms of business, in terms of culture, in terms of innovation, finance, government. We'd be in a real mess. So what role can our viewers play in strengthening and supporting you both and the Jewish community in the fight against Jew hatred?
Well, it's interesting, because what we haven't mentioned so far is the tremendous community we've found on social media, that people talk about how demonic social media is, but actually it's like a dog that's well trained and how you use it. I couldn't have done this without the tremendous support of individuals and groups on social media. Every time somebody presses the like button, they help. And it's understanding there's something called the ethics of the father. And one of them is something that drives me, and I would say this to everybody I speak to, which is the day is long, the task is hard, the master is hard. So we may not be able to finish the task, but we have a duty to begin it.
Judith and Jed, thank you so much for being my guests on today's Middle East Report, and I want to thank you for watching today's programme. What has happened and what we need to expose really is that where Jew hatred exists, whether it's in a political party, whether it's in a society or a nation, it not only attacks the Jewish people, but it destroys our nation. And this is why we have to adopt a zero-tolerance approach to Jew hatred. Because in the Bible it says, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. We want a blessing and not a curse. So I want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.